I want to tell you that I am a being without fear. That is what we Sulhari tell ourselves. 6 limbs, carapace rated against vacuum breach, reflexes calibrated over 400 years of courier work across 40 star systems. I have flown through debris fields that turned other ships to powder. I have delivered classified cargo through active war zones with nothing but nerve and calculation between me and annihilation. I have stared down customs agents from 7 different empires and walked away clean every time. I was afraid of the girl within 4 minutes of meeting her. Her name was Mara Solís. She was waiting for me at Bay 12 of Threshold, Oru, the neutral station that sits at the exact geometric midpoint between human-controlled space and the outer reach, which is to say, at the precise location where every civilized empire's authority becomes theoretical. She was small, barefoot despite the cold deck plating. Her jacket was thermal weave but patched at both elbows with what looked like emergency sealant tape. The kind you use when a hull is bleeding. Atmosphere and elegance is a luxury. Her hair was pulled back with a strip of wire. She looked like a refugee. She looked like she was 9 years old, maybe 10 by Sulhari reckoning, and across her back, strapped with cargo webbing re-rigged into a harness she had clearly fashioned herself, was a Valdesi right blade. I want you to understand what that means. The Valdesi Compact is the oldest continuous empire in the outer reach. 11 star systems, 42 subjugated species. Their warriors are beings of 7 feet and dense black chitin, bred over centuries for one purpose. Their right blades are forged from the alloy of collapsed stars, single-star remnants, compressed and folded 80 times by artisans who spend their entire lives mastering the process. The blade is longer than a grown human is tall. By Galactic treaty, it is classified as a Class 10 artifact, a Deathworlder weapon, meaning its possession by any non-Valdesi citizen is considered, and I am quoting the treaty text here, an explicit act of hostile intent toward the Compact and its sovereign interests. An act of war. She was carrying one on her back like a hiking pack, and she looked up at me with dark eyes that held the particular quality of stillness that I have since come to understand is one of the most specifically human things in existence, not the stillness of emptiness, not the calm of someone who doesn't understand the danger, the stillness of someone who has already made their decisions and is simply waiting for events to catch up. "You're my courier?" she said. "I am Vreth Kaon," I said, because I could not think of anything else. "I was told I was transporting a diplomatic package." "You are," she said, and picked up a small bag from the deck with one hand, her only other luggage, and walked past me toward the Cassaway's boarding ramp. I stood in Bay 12, for what I am embarrassed to admit was a full 14 seconds before I followed her. I demanded an explanation, of course. I demanded it 3 times before we even cleared Threshold Oru's traffic corridor. I wanted to know what a human child was doing, carrying a weapon that could get us both vaporized by any Valdesi patrol vessel, what diplomatic package meant in this context, and where exactly we were supposed to be going. She answered the last question first, which told me something. "Valdesi Prime," she said. I rechecked my navigation manifest. Valdesi Prime was indeed listed as our destination. I had assumed it was a waypoint. The Compact's capital world. The seat of the High Council. A place where non-Valdesi ships were received with the warmth and welcome that empires reserve for insects they haven't decided whether to crush yet. "And the blade?" I asked. She turned to look at me from the co-pilot seat, where she had arranged herself with her legs crossed, and the enormous weapon leaned carefully against the console. She'd padded the contact point with a folded section of her jacket, so it wouldn't scratch the panel, which for some reason was the detail that got to me most. "They gave it to me," she said. "I began, then, to search my memory for the spacer rumors I'd dismissed over the past months. Every courier who ran the border routes had heard variations of the story a human child, found in wreckage, living in a Valdesi forward camp, doing things that didn't make sense. I'd written it off as the kind of mythology that bored spacers inflate to fill long hauls, the kind of story that sounds good over recycled grain spirits and means nothing by daylight. I was pulling it back up from memory and looking at it differently when my proximity sensors screamed. 3 Valdesi interceptors dropped out of fold space directly across our bow, close enough that the gravitational ripple made the Cassaway shudder in her frame. My hand went to the emergency drive before the sensor read finished resolving, and I held it there. Fingers pressed against the warm panel, calculating odds that were not good. They were not firing. Their running lights shifted to a configuration I had never seen in 40 years of flying, a specific pattern, low and steady, used only for one purpose in Valdesi protocol. I had to look it up. I was certain I was misreading it. I was not misreading it. It was a full military honor escort. For us. For this courier vessel, this Sulhari runner with a patched girl in the co-pilot seat and a star iron blade leaned against the navigation panel. I turned slowly to look at Mara Solís. She had already closed her eyes. She was asleep within 30 seconds, one hand resting on the blade's wrapped hilt. The way you might rest your hand on a familiar thing. And I understood, sitting there in the dark between stars with an Empire's warships falling into formation around my little ship, that I was the least important being aboard the Castaway. I was not sure what I was carrying. But I was beginning to understand that the galaxy was not sure either, and that uncertainty, I realized with something that lived very close to awe, was exactly the point. Valdesi Prime does not look like a seat of power from orbit. It looks like something grown rather than built, a dark world wrapped in cities that glow amber and deep violet through the cloud cover, dense and ancient, a planet that has been continuously inhabited for 11,000 years and shows every one of them in its bones. I had never been closer to it than a border relay station, and I am not ashamed to admit that seeing it fill my forward viewport made my secondary hearts compress. The docking bay they directed us to was inside a structure the size of a small moon. It was silent when we landed. Not the silence of an empty place, the silence of a full one, held. Hundreds of Valdesi soldiers in full ceremonial formation, black chitin polished, right blades drawn and inverted, points down, the honor position lining both sides of our ramp corridor for as far as I could see, their respirations, their weight shifting. The sound of an empire, breathing, waiting. Mara came down the ramp ahead of me, barefoot, patched jacket, the blade across her back. Not a single Valdesi soldier moved. I found Sothvarek at the base of the ramp, an old commander, his chitin faded to gray at the edges, wearing no weapons. He had the bearing of someone who had decided, at some point in his long life, that he was done being afraid of things. He looked at me the way you look at furniture, not unkindly, simply accurately. You will want to understand, he said, in trade tongue, and I understood it was not a question. He told me everything. 6 months earlier, a Valdesi survey fleet running a sector sweep through what their charts marked as unclaimed transit space encountered a human colony vessel. The Perihelion. 2,000 civilians. Families. A generation ship making a 40-year crossing to a frontier system, carrying their entire world in their cargo holds. Seeds and soil samples and musical instruments, and the paper books people pack when they're trying to carry their whole culture somewhere new, and they know they can't bring everything, so they bring the things that cannot be replaced. The survey fleet's threat assessment AI flagged the drive signature as a weapons class emitter. The identification failed across 3 redundant systems simultaneously, a catastrophic, 1 in a billion error sequence. The fleet commander had 40 seconds to decide, with an algorithm screaming hostile, and he made the decision that his training and his threat doctrine demanded. The Perihelion was destroyed in 11 seconds. The compact prepared for human war. They knew what human history looked like. They knew how human civilizations responded to atrocity. They fortified the border. They ran projections. Every model they had said the same thing. Retaliation, escalation, war that could last generations. Instead, one person came to their border. A salvage crew had pulled a single survival pod from the wreckage 3 hours after the event. Inside was a girl, unconscious, wrapped in an emergency thermal layer that had been sealed around her by someone else's hands before the end. She had been in the rear cargo section, a stowaway, it turned out, though stowaway implies something furtive, and what Sothvarek described was simply a child who had climbed into a cargo container because she wanted to see the stars up close and had fallen asleep before anyone found her. She was the only survivor. The salvage crew brought her to the forward camp, uncertain what to do with her. They expected grief, screaming, the rage that would make sense. They got something else entirely. She asked questions. Sothvarek's voice shifted when he described this. Just slightly. The way voices shift when they are recounting something they have not fully finished processing. She asked about Valdesi star charts, and how their fold space navigation differed from human calculations, and whether the nutrient paste they gave her contained anything derived from animal protein because she was trying to be vegetarian. She learned their spoken language in 11 days. She repaired a communications array that 3 Valdesi engineers had been unable to fix using components she salvaged from her own survival pod and techniques derived, she explained calmly, from watching how water finds the path of least resistance, which she'd read about in a book someone had packed aboard the Perihelion. She fed injured soldiers from rations she synthesized out of waste material from their own supply system compounds no Valdesi nutritionist had considered combinable. When they asked her how she knew how to do that, she said someone had taught her, on the ship, before it was gone. She didn't say who. She never said who. And then Dravoxan, the warlord commanding the forward camp, a being who had personally conquered 3 systems, summoned her to the arena. Not to harm her. Sothvarek was precise about this. The Valdesi arena is not a place of cruelty. It is a place of assessment. A thing must be understood before an empire can decide what it is. Dravoxan put her in the arena with nothing, no weapon, no armor, no tools, and he faced her himself, at minimal force, to see what she was made of. She lasted 3 days, not by strength, not by speed, by patience, a quality so alien to Valdesi psychology that they had no accurate word for it in their language, had to borrow one from a subjugated species, because the concept of waiting as a weapon, of stillness as strategy, of time itself as something that could be used, was something their warrior culture had never fully developed. She watched. She conserved. She slept when she could. She moved only when movement mattered. She knew the terrain of that arena better by the end of hour 1 than warriors who had trained in it for years. On the 3rd day, Dravoxan set down his blade, walked to her, and spoke 5 words in his own language that Sothvarek translated carefully. I did not understand you. He gave her the blade, not as a trophy. As an apology, yes, but more than that, as an acknowledgement. In Valdesi tradition, when a warlord gifts a right blade, it means one specific thing: you are a thing I was wrong about, and I will not be wrong about you again. She'd carried it ever since. Now she was here to speak to the High Council, not to demand war reparations, not to negotiate from grief as leverage, but to do the thing that had apparently been her intention from the moment she woke up in that survival pod and understood what had happened and decided, in the particular way that humans decide things, what she was going to do about it. She was going to make something. I stood at the back of the council chamber, a vast circular hall of black stone and amber light, where 9 of the most powerful beings in the outer reach sat in formal session, and I watched a barefoot human child in a patched jacket walk to the center of that room and stand there as though she had always belonged in it. A hardline counselor, a being called Vreth Dak, whose faction had been loudest about treating the event as a human provocation, rose to speak first. His intention was transparent: to derail, to reframe, to deny the council's legitimacy, to even receive her. He was practiced at this. He had killed legislation with procedural precision for decades. He got 4 sentences out. Mara held up one hand. He stopped later. I think even he would not have been able to explain why. She spoke for 4 minutes. I will not pretend I understood all of it. My trade tongue is functional, but she was using it in ways that were somehow simultaneously simple and precise, finding the vocabulary that landed true in a language that was not her own. She did not speak of the perihelion with grief. She spoke of it with specificity: names, stories, the particular person who had taught her to make food from nothing, the particular book someone had packed, the particular quality of light through the viewport that she had been watching when she fell asleep, and it had all still been real. She was not performing grief for their sympathy. She was refusing to let them be abstract about it, and then she told them what she wanted. A formal memorial, acknowledged by the Compact, recorded in the official history that would be taught to Valdesi children alongside the survey fleet's error. A treaty that would make the human frontier worlds partners in the outer reach trade, navigation rights, shared charts so that what happened to the perihelion could not happen again through ignorance. And a conversation, ongoing, formal, institutionalized, between human representatives and Valdesi counterparts, not because she trusted them yet, she said, with a directness that made 3 counselors straighten involuntarily, but because trust had to be built from something, and she intended to build it, and she would prefer they helped. Vreth Dak opened his mouth. She looked at him. He closed it. The session ended 12 minutes after it began, with a formal motion of acceptance, the fastest binding motion in Valdesi High Council history, by a margin of several centuries. I filed my courier report that evening, sitting in the cassaway's cabin, while the amber light of Valdesi Prime came through the viewport in long horizontal stripes. The form is standard, 30 fields. I worked through them efficiently: departure point, arrival point, travel duration, fuel expenditure, cargo classification. I stopped at the cargo field for a long time. Officially, she was a diplomatic passenger. I thought about what I had seen: the soldiers standing silent, the counselors straightening in their seats, the warlord who had set down his blade and walked across an arena to say he had been wrong. I thought about 11 days to learn a language. I thought about someone folding an emergency thermal layer around a girl in the last seconds they had, wanting her to live. I thought about what it means to be a species that looks at everything that has been done to it and asks what it can build from this. I typed, "1 human, unclassified, handle with care." I submitted the report. Outside, in the amber dark of an empire's capital world, Mara Solís was already in her next meeting.